You ever been greeted like your soul just walked into the room, not your body? Like your presence quieted someone's chaos, not because you said a word, but because you exist? Most people don't realize it's not the hello that matters. It's the silence that follows, the pause, the look, the feeling of being seen. If someone greets you like that, hold on, because that's not ordinary. That's the kind of love your heart's been waiting for. And today we're talking about it. Raw, real, and deeply personal. When someone sees you and their entire face changes, it's not just about attraction, it's something deeper. It's a quiet gasp their soul takes, a recognition that doesn't need language. It's in the pause before the smile, the way their eyes soften like they've found peace for a second. You've been in rooms where you felt invisible, where your presence was tolerated but never cherished. But then comes a moment, rare and tender, when someone looks at you like you're the ending to a long, painful search. That kind of gaze holds weight, like their whole heart exhales just by looking at you. You don't have to perform, shrink, or shine unnaturally bright to earn it. You just have to exist. They look at you like you've already earned it, like love came before explanation. And for a moment, your walls don't matter, because you finally feel seen without asking to be. You remember what it felt like to walk into places and wonder if anyone would notice. You became good at pretending to be okay with being overlooked. Like being low maintenance made you easier to love. You smiled when it hurt, laughed when it burned, and dimmed your own light just to make others comfortable. You lowered your standards to meet silence halfway. But nothing hurts more than showing up fully and being met with indifference. So when you finally feel the kind of energy that welcomes you in, like your spirit just entered the room, not just your body, it touches something inside that's been bruised for too long. You don't even know how to accept it at first because you've grown used to scraps disguised as effort. But this time feels different. There's no guessing, no wondering, just a kind of presence that wraps around you like warmth after a storm. The way someone greets you says everything they believe about your worth, not in the words, but in the pause, the attention, the way their body turns toward yours like nothing else matters. It's not loud, but it's sincere. It's not perfect, but it's real. And that kind of presence doesn't come from someone who's unsure. You feel it in your chest, like your heart is finally being handled gently after years of being mishandled. The greeting holds a kind of reverence that you didn't even know you deserved, until now. It's not that they treat you like you're fragile, they treat you like you matter. Like showing up for you is not a task, but a privilege. That moment, that first look, that first word, it becomes a quiet place you can rest in. It doesn't need a name, but it changes everything. Sometimes, the most healing thing is not grand gestures or poetic words, but a simple, honest greeting that carries weight. A greeting that tells you, I see you, I'm glad you're here, you matter. Not because you did something, not because you're useful, but because your presence is enough. You remember all the times your worth felt transactional, like love had to be earned, chased, or proven. You remember how exhausting it was to feel like too much and not enough at the same time. And when you're finally met with gentleness, it breaks something open inside you. It feels like being found after years of being lost in plain sight. Like someone reached into your silence and said, you don't have to hide anymore. It doesn't need flowers or fanfare, just presence and a heart that chooses you with full attention. There's a sacred difference between someone who sees you and someone who looks at you. There's a sacred difference between someone who sees you and someone who looks at you. You've met people who only greeted the version of you that made them comfortable. They smiled at the surface but ignored your soul. You learned to play the part, to be nice, to be easy, to be digestible. But there's a silent ache that builds when your truth keeps being buried for the sake of peace. So when you're met with a greeting that holds space for all of you, the messy, the deep, the beautiful, it stops you in your tracks. You don't have to dilute your light. You don't have to fake your strength. You get to just be. And that kind of acceptance is like medicine to the heart. You may not cry in front of them, but your soul does. Because for once, love didn't require you to disappear. There is something unforgettable about the moment someone greets you with intention. It doesn't matter if it's once a day or 1,000. Each time feels like the first. Because it's not mechanical. It's not something they learned from a book. It's instinctual. It's a soft recognition that says, I've been waiting for this moment, even if I didn't know it. It holds no agenda, no performance, just honesty. And after years of one-sided effort, that kind of welcome feels holy. It tells the little girl inside you who kept reaching, who kept trying, you were never the problem. It reminds you that being loved isn't supposed to feel like punishment. That when it's right, it feels like returning, like being pulled into the warmth of something you forgot you deserved. People often speak loudly when their presence carries little, but the one who greets you with quiet awe, that's the one whose energy you feel long after they've walked away. They don't need to announce their affection. You feel it in the way they lean in, not out. In how their voice changes when they say your name, in how the world seems to pause when they acknowledge your presence. That kind of moment is more than a greeting. It's a reminder that love can be soft and safe, not chaotic and confusing. It's a whisper to your spirit that says, you're finally here, and I'm not letting you go unnoticed. And when that happens, the armor you've worn so long begins to loosen, not because you were told to, but because you finally can. Some greetings don't just meet you, they find you. They gather all the scattered pieces you've learned to hide. You feel understood without explaining, valued without proving, loved without performing. And that kind of connection, no matter how rare, teaches you everything you forgot about your own worth. It tells you that maybe the way you love, deeply, fiercely, tenderly, isn't too much. It just needs the right place to land. You stop begging to be seen, you stop chasing what doesn't see your heart. Because once you're truly greeted with that kind of intentional love, anything less becomes unlivable. You've tasted peace now. You've been met in silence. And somehow in that moment, everything begins to make sense. When someone values your presence, they don't greet you out of habit. They greet you like they've missed something, like your return filled in a blank space they carried all day. You feel it in how they stop what they're doing and how they pause and turn, even for a second longer than necessary. They don't brush past you like another moment in a busy day. They greet you like every moment without you was a little too quiet, a little too incomplete. And when that happens, you don't just feel seen, you feel wanted. Not in a shallow way, not in a, you're here, so I guess that's nice way, but in a way that makes your soul take a breath and say, this feels different. Because deep down, you know the difference between someone who welcomes your body and someone who welcomes your being. It's easy to pretend you're okay with being invisible when life teaches you how to be silent. You become the one who always understands, always waits, always adjusts. You walk into rooms and smile first, hoping someone will meet you halfway. But no one ever really does. You learn to downplay your expectations, to laugh off your own needs, to make excuses for the way they never really greet you. And that ache, it grows quietly. You start wondering if maybe you are asking for too much. Maybe wanting someone to notice your entrance with more than a nod is childish. So you swallow that hunger, you wear your strength like armor, but deep down, you're starving for acknowledgement. Not praise, not attention, just the soft truth that your presence makes someone feel something. When someone greets you with their full self, time slows down, even if just for a heartbeat. You feel the stillness before they speak. You feel the way their energy leans into yours, like they've been waiting for the permission to breathe again. That kind of presence doesn't show up in grand ways, but it shows up. You're not a checklist, you're not an afterthought, and you don't feel like you're intruding. You feel welcomed in a way that says, I've been waiting for this, for you. And that greeting, it heals something silent inside of you. It tells all the moments you were brushed off, hurried past, talked over. You deserve more than that. And the scariest part, you didn't even know how badly you needed it until you felt it for the first time. There is a kind of loneliness that sits inside you even when you're surrounded by people. The kind where you're physically present, but emotionally abandoned. You try to stay grateful, try to be low maintenance, try to not make it a big deal. But you feel the hollow space growing every time you walk in, and no one notices the way your spirit is shrinking. You stop expecting warmth, you stop hoping for pause, and you begin to accept the coldness like it's normal. But then someone greets you with care and suddenly the numbness cracks. You feel the ache come back, the one you buried to survive. And it hits you. You've been touch-starved in a world full of hands. All you wanted was someone who greeted you like your return mattered, like you were missed, like you made the day feel whole. There are moments when you want to collapse into someone's greeting, not because you're weak, but because you've been strong for too long. You want a greeting that doesn't require you to hold it together. That lets you be tired, soft, real. You want to walk into a room and not have to wear your I'm fine face. You want someone to look at you and notice, really notice, the heaviness in your shoulders, the quiet in your eyes. And instead of asking you to explain, they just greet you with gentleness. You want to feel that someone has been waiting to make you feel safe again, if only for a moment. You want their presence to remind you that you don't always have to carry it alone. that being greeted with love is not a luxury, it's a need your soul has begged for. We all crave to be remembered in someone's rhythm, to not be an interruption in their day, but a highlight, to not be tolerated, but anticipated. You notice it in small things. The way their voice changes, the way their posture opens up, the way they pause just long enough to tell you, you matter here. You're not a background character. You're not a distraction. You're the reason they refocus. And when that greeting happens, you don't feel like you're begging for love anymore. You feel chosen, without effort, without performance. And it brings up every memory of when you weren't. When you begged to be prioritized, only to be met with cold eyes and clock-watching silence. But this greeting, this pause, rewrites something. It tells your body you're not hard to love. They just never knew how to see you. That notices your patterns, your pauses, your unspoken cries for gentleness. It's not too much to want to be met where you are, not where it's convenient for someone else. And when that greeting finally happens, when someone says your name with understanding, with warmth tailored to your wounds, you feel something shift inside you. You feel a kind of peace that doesn't come from noise, but from recognition. And recognition is the kind of love that lingers, even in silence. You remember the day someone finally greeted you without assumptions. They didn't brush past you. They didn't give a rehearsed hello. They looked at you with curiosity, with kindness, with a question in their eyes that said, "What do you need today?" And for a moment, you didn't know how to respond, because you'd never been asked that way before. You were used to being strong, used to being the one who adapted. But in that greeting, you saw someone willing to meet you in your language, not theirs. You didn't have to translate. You didn't have to fake ease. You were allowed to be whole, messy, tired, uncertain, and still be welcomed. That moment became sacred because it gave you back a piece of yourself you forgot you even lost. Love doesn't always arrive in grand ways. Sometimes it's in a small, patient greeting, one that comes slowly, softly, with intentional energy, one that doesn't rush past your pain or minimize your quiet. It looks like someone choosing to ask, not assume. It sounds like your name spoken with warmth. It feels like eyes that search for the truth behind your practiced smile. And when it's real, it doesn't require you to be okay first. It doesn't need you to have answers. It meets you where you are and says, "This is enough." That kind of greeting disarms the years you spent building walls. It holds the parts of you that were always too heavy for others. And in that way, tea being shared, even for a moment, you finally understand what love sounds like in your voice. You don't need someone who greets you with perfection. You need someone who greets you with presence. Someone who notices that today your tone is quieter than usual, that your energy is a little dimmer, that you're trying to smile but it doesn't quite reach your eyes. Someone who doesn't need you to explain before offering kindness. Who sees the invisible shifts in you, not because they're told, but because they care to notice. That kind of greeting doesn't ask you to show up perfectly. It says, however you are today, I see you, I honor you. And in a world that constantly demands performance, that kind of acceptance becomes healing. It becomes home. Because your language was finally heard and your heart was finally spoken back to, in fluency, in softness, in truth. There are parts of you you've hidden for so long you forgot they existed. The quiet ache, the fear of being too much, the exhaustion of explaining yourself over and over. But then you're met with a greeting that touches those parts without judgment, and suddenly they awaken. You realize you were never asking for too much. You were asking for someone who cared enough to learn your rhythm, your soft parts, your hard days, someone who saw the sacredness of your vulnerability and chose to handle it gently. That greeting doesn't feel like an act. It feels like a promise, not one made with words, but with consistency. And that consistency becomes safety, and safety becomes love. The kind of love that doesn't have to be loud, just true. You've spent years speaking your needs into empty rooms, whispering your pain to people who never stayed long enough to hear it, adjusting your truth so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. But when someone finally greets you in your language, it changes you. It doesn't fix a very thing. It doesn't erase the past, but it gives you something you hadn't felt in years. Relief. The relief of not having to teach someone how to care. Some people greet you in the way they know, not in the way you need. They show up with gestures that make sense to them but feel empty to you. You tell yourself not to complain, not to seem ungrateful, because at least they're trying. But deep down, you still feel alone. You want to feel held, not with arms, but with understanding. You want someone to speak in your emotional language, the one you've hidden so long, no one notices its silence. And when someone finally does, when they look at you and see the real you behind the brave face, It undoes everything you've taught yourself to accept. It makes you realize that love is not just in the giving, it's in the listening. You stop yearning for more when someone finally learns to meet you in your most unspoken needs. You've been in rooms where people called your name but never truly saw your heart. You smiled through greetings that never touched your soul, nods that felt cold, words that bounced off your armor. And for a long time you convinced yourself that this is what love looks like: distant, distracted, convenient. You stopped asking to be understood. You stopped hoping someone would learn how to love you. Not the version of you that made things easier, but the one that broke quietly when no one noticed. And that quiet breaking became your new normal, until one day you're met with a presence that doesn't rush, doesn't assume, doesn't perform, it just sees. And that greeting, that simple moment of awareness, becomes a lifeline. It tells the deepest parts of you. You're not too complicated, you're just waiting for the right kind of care. Sometimes the most painful part of being unloved is being misunderstood. They think they're doing enough, and you feel guilty for wanting more. But what you need isn't complicated. It's presence, it's attention, it's someone learning how you receive love. You want someone, who doesn't just say hi. You want someone who says it in a way that calms your anxiety, that slows your breathing, that makes you feel safe. You want someone who learns that your silence isn't distance, it's exhaustion, that your quick smile sometimes hides days of holding it together. And when that greeting shifts from autopilot to awareness, you notice. You notice because it feels rare, because it feels real, because it feels like someone finally stopped talking at you and started speaking to you in your language. You've carried a heart that learned to translate other people's love while no one ever tried to speak yours. You've adjusted, bent, stretched, shrunk, just to make connection feel possible. You became fluent in sacrifice. You greeted others in the way they needed, even when it cost you your own voice. You gave without asking, smiled without receiving, and you convinced yourself that maybe your kind of love was too hard to meet. But it's not. It never was. It just needed someone who didn't make you feel like a puzzle, someone who chose to understand instead of fix. When you're finally greeted with that kind of softness, the kind that listens deeper than words, you break. Not from pain, but from the overwhelming grace of being felt. And in that feeling, you remember you're worthy of being learned. There's a kind of grief that lives in being half seen, being touched but not known, being greeted out of duty, not desire. You start to question if maybe what you need is unreasonable, like asking to be known is asking too much. But it's not too much to want a connection that studies you with care. There are greetings that feel like a door closing, and then there are greetings that feel like arms opening. When you've walked through enough cold rooms, when you've smiled at people who looked through you instead of at you, you begin to expect emptiness. You start showing up with your guard already built, your voice already softened, your presence already small. But then one day you're met with a kind of greeting that makes your shoulders drop, not because you were told to relax, but because something in their presence gave you permission to. It feels like safety, not loud, not dramatic, just safe. And you didn't realize how long you'd been holding your breath until someone looked at you and you could finally exhale. The moment becomes a pause in time, a reminder that you still deserve to be someone's peace. You've learned how to be your own comfort because the world didn't offer you much. You became your own cheerleader, your own healer, your own protector, not because you wanted to, but because you had to. The people you expected to show up often showed you the back of their attention, not the front of their care. So you stopped expecting softness. You stopped waiting for anyone to ask how your heart was doing. You taught yourself to walk into rooms silently without needing a reaction. But deep down, you still hoped someone would notice. Not just the way you look, but the way you carry it all. So when you're finally greeted with the kind of energy that says, you don't have to keep pretending, something inside you begins to unravel in the most beautiful, terrifying, freeing way. There is something sacred about being greeted like home after you've spent years feeling like a stranger in your own skin. Not because someone said the perfect words, but because their energy softened the space around you. They didn't just greet your presence, they welcomed your essence. And that kind of welcome is rare. You're used to people looking past you, checking boxes, offering smiles that don't reach their eyes. But this was different. This felt like being seen in the places you hide. Like someone had been waiting for you, even if they didn't know it. And it wasn't about romance or perfection. It was about peace. It was about being greeted like you belong, not because of what you give, but simply because of who you are. And that feeling is unforgettable. You remember what it was like to walk into places and wonder if your presence mattered. You learned to become small in big moments, to silence yourself before anyone could ignore you. You've been told you're strong, but strength was never the goal. Survival was. You wore resilience like a badge, but underneath it was exhaustion. So when someone greets you with softness, with consistency, with presence, it shakes you. You don't know whether to lean into it or run from it. Because being greeted like you're loved feels foreign when all you've known is being tolerated. But little by little, that greeting begins to melt something frozen in you. You stop bracing for rejection. You stop overthinking your words. You let yourself be human again. And in that humanness, you finally feel held. Some greetings feel like formality, others feel like recovery. When you've spent your life being overlooked, ignored, or reduced to what others wanted from you, you stop expecting anyone to really see you. You become so good at hiding that you forget how to be held. But then, unexpectedly, someone greets you with care. Not just physical, but emotional. They don't just say, "Hi." They ask with their whole being, "How are you, really?" And you realize they're not just passing time, they're pausing time for you. And in that pause, everything changes. You're not invisible, you're not too much. You are not an afterthought. You're real to someone, and that realness brings tears you didn't know were waiting. It's one thing to be greeted, it's another to be welcomed back from the battles. There's a difference between a greeting that sounds good and one that feels good. You can hear the same words from 10 different mouths, but only one will reach your heart. That's because tone is truth. Intention is everything. And you've heard enough empty hellos to know when one is real. So when someone greets you like you're their soft place to land, like your presence is their peace, you don't forget it, not because it's loud, but because it's gentle. And after years of confusion, after being loved with conditions, that gentleness becomes your mirror. It reflects back the truth that you are not too broken to be embraced. You are not too complicated to be chosen. You are enough, just as you are, and sometimes all it takes is one greeting to remind you of that. You've been the one who shows up, who gives, who remembers, who holds it all together, and yet you've walked through seasons where no one noticed you were falling apart. You've greeted others with warmth while your own soul sat in silence. So when someone finally greets you like you matter, like you're not just a helper but a human, it hits a place in you that words can't touch. It doesn't fix everything, but it softens the sting. Because for once, you're not the one carrying it all. For once, someone meets you where you are and says, "You don't have to do anything for me to care." And in that moment, you feel the weight shift. You feel the ache lessen. And maybe, just maybe, you start to believe that care isn't always something you have to earn. The world often teaches you to be hard, to protect yourself, to not expect too much. But you weren't made to live guarded. You were made for connection, for depth, for love that knows how to stay. And when you're finally greeted with that kind of love, steady, kind, unwavy, airing, it feels like coming home to a version of yourself you thought was lost. You begin to loosen your grip on the fear. You stop apologizing for needing to be held. And for the first time in a long time, you feel allowed to soften, allowed to be cared for, allowed to just exist without performing. That greeting, that presence, that emotional safety, well, it's everything you've been aching for in silence. And when it finally comes, you don't run from it. You breathe it in. Because your soul knew this feeling before your mind ever dared to hope for it.